What I have in my project currently is the basic layout of the project, and it is a control node with a panel for its background, and then it has a center container with a VBox container at its center, of course. So the center container basically holds its child elements at the center of the parent container, and then I have a VBox container which holds things in a vertical position, and it has three items inside: a label with a font size of 50 pixels, so you just come here to theme overrides and then you change its font size. And then I have a button, one for starting and for stopping the timer, and the other one is for pausing and resuming the timer. And finally, the last one is I have a timer node, and this one is what will be responsible for calculating the time that has elapsed. So by default, its wait time will be 1 second, and I will just tell you what this is in a bit. So I can come here to my control node and attach a script to it, and then now we can get to coding. So I'll just remove the default text, and then I'll attach my signals from my buttons to the script. So I'll just come over here, control button, node, pressed signal, attach it to the script, and then I'll do the same for the pause button. And then I will also add a timeout signal from my timer, and then I'll just attach this one also to my script. So the basic process of what I'll be doing, or the basic steps, will be, first of all, I will implement the functionality for starting and stopping the timer, and then the functionality for pausing and resuming the timer. After that, I will implement the functionality for calculating the time that has elapsed, and then finally I will convert all of the time that has elapsed into minutes, seconds, hours, and days. So those are the basic steps I'll be taking, and now we can get to implementing those in code. So first of all, before we actually continue, when we press the start button, what we'll want to do is to say timer.start, and this one is basically the function that starts the timer. So when we run this, what will happen is the timer has this wait time property, and this is the amount of time that the timer will wait so that it can run this function over here, or this signal. So by default it's 1 second. So when I say start, the timer will wait 1 second, and then it will run this function, and then it will wait another second, and then it will run this function, and then it will wait and run this function until I explicitly tell it to stop by saying timer.stop. So that's how you stop the timer. And then of course you can change this wait time to any time you'd like. So you can change it to 1 millisecond. That is the lowest value it can go to. And then you can change it to a very high number, or 4096 seconds or more, because the slider can only just show this value. So you can set it to more, I think. So that's basically the wait time property and how we will be controlling the timer. So I can just remove this over here, and then we can get to implementing our functionalities. So first of all, I'll come up here and I'm going to create a variable called isStopped, and this will be equal to true by default. So what this is the variable that will keep track of whether the timer is running or paused, or stopped, not paused. And by default it's equal to true, because when I enter the scene, the timer will not be running unless I have auto start on. So if I have auto start, the moment I run my scene, the timer will start running. So because we have it off, we are going to say the timer is stopped by default. Also, this one shot property over here is the property that is when we press start, it runs continuously. But if you have one shot on, the timer will only run once and then it will stop. So those are these two properties over here. So by default, when we run the scene, the timer is stopped. But when we press this button, we want something to occur. So if the timer is stopped, then we want to start it. So is stopped is equal to false, and then we can tell the timer to start. So timer.start. And then finally we can set our control button's text. We can change it from start to stop, because the timer is now running, and the next function we'll want to be able to do with that button is to stop the timer. So we have to change the text from start to stop. And then finally we can say if the timer is running, we are going to stop it. So is stopped is equal to true, and then we are going to tell the timer to stop. So timer.stop. And then finally we are going to change its text back to start. So not center container. So control button dot text is now equal to start. Just change this to capital. And then if I run my scene and I press start, you can see that it has changed to stop. And then if I press stop, it has changed to start. So now we can start and stop our timer. Now we can get to implementing the functionality for pausing and resuming our timer. So if our timer is paused, so if timer.paused, we are going to say timer.paused is equal to false. So if the timer is paused, resume it. And then because now the timer is running, we are going to change our pause button's text to pause, so that because the timer is running, the next function we'll want to be able to take with this button is to pause the timer, because it is running. And then else, so if the timer is not running, or if the timer is paused, we are going to say timer dot paused is equal to true. So if the timer is currently running and not paused, we are going to pause it. And then we are going to say that our pause button's text, so pause.text, is equal to resume. So if the timer is paused, then if the timer is paused, we are going to unpause it, and then we're changing the button's text to pause. And if the timer is running or resumed, we are going to pause it, and then we're going to change the text for that button to resume. So if I run my scene and I press pause, we are going to pause the timer, and if I press resume, we can resume the timer and we can pause it. So we basically have that functionality. So now the final thing we want to do is to come up here, and then we are going to say if the timer is paused, I'll tell you why I'm doing this. So if timer dot paused, then we want to flip its state. So on pause pressed. But if you didn't know, you can actually call signals like normal functions. And basically what I'm doing here is, if we pause the timer and we call start, the timer won't run because it's paused. So every time we press the start or pause button, we want to check if the timer is paused. And if it's paused, we are going to flip its state to so that it can actually be unpaused and it will run. So you have to write this at the top over here so that your timer will run even if it's paused. So with that, we can pause, unpause, start, and stop our timer. So now we can get to implementing the functionality for calculating the elapsed time. And for that, we'll come up here and we're going to create a variable called milliseconds. And this will hold the number of milliseconds that have elapsed. And then we'll use this number of milliseconds to calculate the minutes, hours, and days. So let us get to implementing that functionality. So when I press the start button and my timer starts running, the wait time will elapse, and then this function will be run. So I can change my wait time over here to 0.01 seconds. And then I'll say, so after every 0.1 seconds, when my timer times out, I am going to say milliseconds plus equal to 10. So I'll increment my milliseconds to by 10, and then I am going to set my labels text to the string of the milliseconds. So the label only takes in strings, and our milliseconds are integers, so we have to convert it into a string. And now, what if I run my scene and I press start? You can see that we have the number of elapsed milliseconds. And if I press pause, we can pause our timer. If I press resume, we can see that our time has resumed, and we can pause it and resume it as many times as we'd like. But if I press stop, we can see that this is the final value of our time, so 9,950 milliseconds. And if I press start again, there's one functionality I didn't implement. So if we stop our timer, we want to come over here and we want to say milliseconds is equal to 0, so that we can start afresh. So now the project should be working fine. So if I start the timer and I pause it, I resume it, pause it again, resume it, and then maybe I stop it, this will be the final value. So if I press start, we can see that we have started from 0 again. So now every time we stop and start our timer, it will start from 0. But if we pause and resume our timer, it will start from where it had left off. So now we can get to converting our time to minutes, seconds, and hours. And how we'll do that is we'll create a function over here called convert time, and it will take in the arguments of the milliseconds that we have. And then we can just save the scene, and then over here, instead of setting the label for the text for this label to the milliseconds, we can set it to convert time, and then we're just going to pass in the milliseconds. So this will return a string, which will then be fed into our label. So in our convert time, what we want to do is to create a variable called seconds, and this will be equal to the milliseconds that we have divided by 1,000 to convert it into seconds, because you remember that 1,000 milliseconds make up 1 second. So we're going to divide the milliseconds by 1,000 to get the seconds, and then finally we're going to say modulo 60. And what this is basically, if the seconds reach 60, start counting the seconds from 0. So that's how you'll wrap around. So it's going to reach 60 seconds, and then it's going to start from 0. And then we're going to say var minutes is equal to the milliseconds that we have. Then we're going to divide it by 1,000 to convert those milliseconds into seconds. And then we're going to divide by 60 to convert those seconds to minutes. And then we're going to say modulo 60. So if the minutes are 60 or more, start from 0 again. And then we're going to say var hours is equal to the milliseconds converted into seconds, and then convert those seconds to minutes, and then those minutes into hours. And then finally you're going to say modulus 24. So if the hours are more than 24, start from 0. And then finally for the days, we are going to say the days are equal to our milliseconds divided by 1,000, then this divided by 60, and then this divided by 60 again to convert it into hours, and then divided by 24 to convert those hours into days. And then finally we can have another variable for the milliseconds, and this one will be MSS so that it doesn't conflict with this variable name over here, or I can just call it something like milli. And then this one will be equal to our milliseconds modulus 1,000. So this one will say that if the milliseconds are more than 1,000, start from 0, because 1,000 milliseconds are 1 second. And then for this one, we can also divide it by 10, so that there is no like final 0 at the end of our text, which will make it look weird. So if we can just return a string of like our seconds, and then plus a colon, and then plus a string of our milliseconds, so milli, and then this is the string we will be returning into our convert time seconds. So I will add in all of these minutes, hours, and seconds later. So if I run my scene now and I press start, we can see that we have our seconds and our milliseconds, and if our milliseconds reach 1000, but we have of course deleted the last 0 by dividing it by 10. So I'll just show you this. If I remove that, the division by 10, we'll see that when we run this and our milliseconds reach 1000, they start from 0, and that's basically the function of this modulus operator over here. So I'll just divide it by 10 to remove the last 0. And now we have our seconds and milliseconds. So one thing you'll notice about this is that there's some sort of flickering that occurs, and we can fix that by saying seconds, the string of the seconds, and then we say pad zeros 2, and then for the string of the milliseconds we will also say pad zeros 2. And basically what this pad zeros function is that it will ensure that the number of characters in our seconds and our milliseconds are always 2. So we are always going to have something like 01, 02, and 03. But whereas before, if we had 1 millisecond, it will be something like 1. But when we get to 10, we were going to add an extra character, so it was pushing everything around. So now that we have ensured that our characters are always two digits long, if we run our scene and we press start, we will see that there's no more flickering, because there's always, the number of characters are always consistent. So now we can add in our hours and days and minutes. So for that, we'll have to create another variable called time text, and here is where we'll be formatting everything. So we are going to check if we have days. So if our day, the number of days we have is greater than 0, then what we want to say is our time text is equal to the string of our days, pad zeros. No, we don't have to pad the days. We can leave the days as they are. So it's equal to the string of the days, then plus a colon. And then if our hours are greater than 0, then time text, not is equal to, it's supposed to be plus equal to. We're supposed to be adding onto the text, not changing the text itself. So if we have hours, we're going to say the string time text plus equal to the string of our hours, and then for this one we have to say pad zeros 2, and then we're going to put in our colon, and then for minutes we're going to say if we have minutes. So if minutes is greater than 0, we are going to say time text plus equal to the string of the minutes dot pad zeros 2, and then we are finally going to add in our colon again. So basically what this does is it waits and checks if we actually have minutes, so that it can add it to the end of our text over here. So if we don't have any minutes, it's going to be like this, but if we add minutes, we are going to add in the minutes like so. So it's going to be we're going to have 3 separate values. So now when we run our scene, and then let's just change the number of milliseconds being added so that we can illustrate the point. So if I change this milliseconds to 10 or 1000 or something like 1000, and then I run my text, we see when the seconds reach, oh sorry, finally I'm not supposed to be returning this over here. I'm supposed to say time text plus equal to the string of the seconds. So for the seconds and the milliseconds, I don't really have an if statement because we always want to have them. So I'll just be adding those ones every single time without an if statement. And then finally, I will return the time text. And then now once I run my scene, it should work properly. So start. And now we see when the seconds reach 60, the minutes are added. And then when the minutes will reach 60, the hours will be added. And then when the hours reach 24, 1 day will be added. So yeah, when we can return this back to its default value of 10 milliseconds, and then we run our scene, the timer should work properly. So start, and then 1 second has passed, 2 seconds have passed. We can pause it, and then we see, oh, 3 minutes for 480 milliseconds. We can resume it, we can pause it again, and then we can stop the timer, and then we can start it again from 0. So yeah, that's basically how you code a timer with Godot. If you didn't understand the process well, you can just rewatch the video as many times as you'd like. And with that, I will see you in the next tutorial. Goodbye.